Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the St. Augustine Center for Ethics, Religion, and Culture at the College of Our Lady of the Elms. I'm Dr. Peter DiPergola, Shaunus Family Chair for the Study of the Humanities, Associate Professor of Bioethics and Medical Humanities, and Executive Director of the St. Augustine Center. I have the distinct honor of hosting tonight's distinguished lecture in culture, titled Catholic Spirituality and Dialogue with Secular Culture. Immediately following tonight's lecture, there will be an opportunity to engage directly with our distinguished speaker. For those with questions and comments for Dr. Jacobs, please feel free to raise your hand and I will bring a microphone to you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Sister Carol Allen, SSJ, Special Assistant to the President for Mission and Charism, and immediate past Director of the Office of Campus Ministry at Elms College. Sister Carol has graciously agreed to lead us in prayer this evening. Please join me in welcoming Sister Carol Allen.
If we can just remember that during these days of darkness, that we are the light of the world, and it is that light that we bring to our world every day. Spirit of Advent, we reflect your glistening light, glowing in the brightness of your love. We await the birth of greater awareness of peace in our world, embracing the stranger as neighbor. We hope for the equity among your people, welcoming those who differ from us. We pray that the love of life leads to a love of worship, of relationship with the giver of the gift of life. We pray for our community that we gather in the spirit of celebration and with anticipation. As always, we pray in the name of our God, Our Lady of the Elms, and Saint Joseph, whose name we bear. Amen.
Thank you, Sister Carol, for that beautiful prayer. It's now my pleasure to introduce the 11th President of the College of Our Lady of the Elms, Dr. Harry Dumais. Dr. Dumais is President of the College of Our Lady of the Elms, but prior to joining Elms, he held senior executive level positions at St. Anselm College, the Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Harvard University, and Boston College and Boston University. Dr. Dumais received his BS degree, magna cum laude, in mechanical technology from Lincoln University in Missouri, an MA degree in public administration from Framingham State University, an MBA and graduate certificate in corporate finance from Boston University, and a Ph.D. in higher education administration from Boston College. Dr. Dumais has consulted internationally on projects related to international higher education in economic development with organizations in Europe and in the Caribbean, and serves on a number of local, regional, and international boards. Please join me in welcoming President Harry Dumais.
Thank you, Peter, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Fall 2023 St. Augustine Center's Distinguished Lecture in Culture. We're delighted to have all of you here with us this evening. Carolyn Jacobs definitely brought in a crowd. I have an easy assignment this afternoon, and it is to introduce our guest speaker, who we all know need no introduction. I'll come back to that. But before, allow me to recognize and thank present and past members of the Board of Trustees who are with us this evening, including the Chair of the Board of Trustees, Paul Stelzer, and the immediate past Chair of the Board of Trustees, Cindy Lyons. Thank you to the Sisters of St. Joseph who are with us. Thank you to my wife, Maggie, faculty, staff, and colleagues who are here this evening. I would also like to take a moment to recognize and thank the many people who have been instrumental in the life of the St. Augustine Center for Ethics, Religion, and Culture. Certainly The center's executive director, Dr. Peter de Pergola, the Shawness Family Chair for the Study of the Humanities, and Dr. de Pergola's collaborators in the center, the members of the St. Augustine Center Advisory Board, the Elms faculty and staff, and the generous members of the community who have offered financial support to the center and its goals, and this includes our distinguished lecturer. And now to the task at hand. It is truly my honor and privilege to introduce tonight's featured speaker, Dr. Carolyn Jacobs. From time to time, in the cacophony of the print news, television talk shows, social media feeds, it's hard to stop and even hear oneself think. One conversation with Dr. Carolyn Jacobs and problem solved. She has a way of asking the probing questions, of cutting through the noise and centering the conversation on depth, on sacred texts, on our inner voice and spirituality. Her talk today is quite fitting with this lecture series at this very moment in time. We launched the St. Augustine Center for Ethics, Religion, and Culture at Elms College in 2020 as a way to explore a variety of contemporary topics through the prism of faith, ethics, our Catholic tradition, and the wisdom of other religions. This lecture series is a part of the St. Augustine Center's larger mission. The center is, of course, continuing the legacy of the founding principles of the college by the Sisters of St. Joseph 95 years ago to form a community rooted in faith and educated in mind, where thoughtful discourse on issues related to ethics, spirituality, and culture is fostered and encouraged. Thoughtful discourse has certainly been challenged recently by a very polarized society. Moreover, with the tragedies occurring in the world, with all the disturbing footage from home and abroad dominating the daily news cycle, it is almost understandable for people to surrender to apathy, or worse, to get discouraged. Yes, it is by holding fast to our shared traditions of morality, spirituality, and faith that we have a searchlight to guide us through the most unsettling of times. Those traditions provide the moral compass that leads us in the direction of compassion, understanding, and love. And this is the message that the St. Augustine Center was created to help amplify, well beyond the physical confines of our campus. That is also the message of our special guest tonight. Dr. Carolyn Jacobs has made it a central part of her professional career and her writing to bring an appreciation of spirituality into social work. Dr. Jacobs spent 35 years on the faculty of the Smith College School for Social Work. She retired as the Dean and the Elizabeth Marting Treuhaft Professor and the Director of Contemplative Clinical Practice and Advanced Certificate Program in Spirituality and Social Work Practice. In 2001, Dr. Jacobs was elected to the National Academies of Practice as a distinguished social work practitioner. Dr. Jacobs served a full cycle of 3 terms as a member of the Elms College Board of Trustees, and then, to our delight, agreed to come back to the board for another tour of duty. She's also a member of the Board of Trustees for Emerita University and the Board of Directors for the Mind and Life Institute. Dr. Jacobs has written extensively on the topic of spirituality in social work. Her most recent publication is Contemplative Spaces in Social Work Practice in the Journal of Pain and Symptom Management. She earned her BA from Sacramento State University her Master of Social Work from San Diego State University, and her doctorate from the Heller School of Brandeis University. She received her training as a spiritual director from the Shellam Institute for Spiritual Formation, and she maintains a spiritual direction practice. Her discussion today will explore how, in a sociological sense, we can employ the teaching of Jesus to reclaim our sense of community and to push back against the age of moral relativism, hyper-consumerism, which unfortunately at Christmas time is in full display these days, and the shallowness of a culture devoted to self-centeredness. Colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Jacobs as she comes to the podium. Without further ado.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Well, good. You are almost there. I often say that to people because, and particularly when I was dean, I would stand and say good afternoon, and I'd wait. And I finally had to do the whole preface thing and say, I'm an African-American woman. It's about relationships. I need to know that you're there. We travel this journey together, and there is something about how do we connect with one another that is so critical. I am most grateful for the invitation to do this lecture. I think I was back and forth about it a bit, saying that, you know, I keep raising these questions at the board level, so I guess I have to do what I used to do to some of my students who would keep raising questions and say, you know, you really ought to do a paper on that. Yeah. Now, it may have eliminated a few questions, but not among the Smithies. They were often up to the task and challenge. I think it is so important these days, as we look at the issues surrounding us, to look at Catholic spirituality and to claim that, and to not be ashamed or feeling like we are too committed to a particular religious tradition. It's also an honoring of our founders and of the Sisters of St. Joseph, who really brought their tradition well into play to provide the services so essential in educating a generation so much in need. And here we are continuing that education. So being clear about who we are and how we're rooted is very important. The issue of dialogue is so critical today. We don't do that well in a society any longer. We used to be able to have good conversations with one another across the political spectrum and to engage in potential solutions. We have opportunities to do that. We have the intellectual capacity. The issue is, how do we draw the spiritual, the heart, into that discussion? And then the unique dimension of the secular culture. That I was most intrigued with in my reading and research on this topic, because I thought understanding generations and what has changed in our society over time helps to understand why we struggle with the next generation. So I remember on vacation, and I think I've shared this with a couple of people, I was away for Thanksgiving with family that I hadn't seen for 4 years out in California, and I kept pursuing the 14-year-old for a conversation and realizing that 14-year-olds do not want to have conversations with elderly members of the family, in public especially. And yet, that young man, one, because I was particularly agitated about the number of cell phones that showed up at dinner. And so I really was pushing him a bit. But that young man, as I was getting on and off of tour buses in Mexico, always reached out to give me his hand or to grab my arm. And I thought, family sunk in well. So while he may not talk to me, he does what he has been trained to do. And that is every elderly member in the family was not to be let go of. And I must admit, so I came home and then managed, I'm fine though, managed late at night getting out of the van to fall off face down. Yeah, it's really one of those classic ones of impatience and of being sure that you don't need the help, which the poor van driver had asked me, and I said, no, I can manage it. So an awareness of that sense of vulnerability and where we are, and also an understanding of what happens in the secular culture these days is very important. And so as I look at moving from what is Catholic spirituality and what is dialogue from a Catholic perspective to how this interacts with secular culture, I will speak to the implications for Elms. So from a spiritual Christian perspective, spirituality is traced to the letters of Paul, which signals a life lived in alignment with God's Spirit. Christian spirituality presumes, through God's grace, a human desire and a capacity for growing in union with the triune God. It encompasses the dynamic character of human life lived in conscious relationship with God in Christ through the Spirit, as experienced with a community of believers. To live Christian spirituality is to attend to what is of God and to deepen in a life of conversion that has discipleship as its goal. It gets expressed most authentically in living out of our Christian baptismal promises. At the heart of these promises stands the decision to live in accord with the energies and ways of the triune God. Renewed commitment to our promise is made possible by God's grace, sustained by community, and supported through engagement in meaningful spiritual practices. Practices of prayer, where we develop our relationship with self and God, and practices of care, where we listen to God's call for the right relationships with others and our earth. Spiritual practices render us more open and responsive to the dynamic activity of God's grace. And so I just have listed a number of spiritual practices, and we engage in practice because we seek a way of life. We desire to embody faith that touches and changes us. Thus, we hope in spiritual practice for knowing that springs from the heart's core, the center of our affection, the source of our reflection, and foundation of our will. The point of practice is never mastery, but a deeper relational life. Spiritual practices are to be received, lived into, and reshaped in time and place for generations to come. So Eucharist, Eucharistic adoration, Lectio Divina, meditation, morning offering, Ignatian exam, centering prayer, intercessory prayer, fasting, praying with images, labyrinth meditation, liturgy of the hour, practicing hospitality, discernment, the rosary, the Lord's Prayer, and the Jesus Prayer. One of the things that I'm struck by is increasingly on campuses and in our life, in terms of what comes through social media, on emails. I'm on everybody's list. Naropa, of which I'm no longer on the board, is a Buddhist-inspired university. So I spent 9 years with them, changed the bylaws to make sure that we had term limits, and left. I had very clear about that, and then wound up coming back to Elms, which I was delighted to do. But one of the things that I find is so much of what comes through around stress reduction and stress management and finding one's life, there are websites beyond websites, okay? Now, you're hard-pressed to find consistent Catholic websites. You have to dig for those, which is also very interesting. But what you will find on the secular or Buddhist or other inspired kinds of websites are practices that look very Catholic. The rootedness of who we are is very much in the wider secular world without the discussion of where those practices really came from. So if you look at the practices that are there, you have the Desert Fathers and Mothers. You have Benedictine traditions. You have Carmelite traditions. You have all sorts of contemplative traditions in which practice is firmly rooted. Father Thomas Keating and Centering Prayer. And he spent a lot of time. I saw him and the Dalai Lama in dialogue. And Father Keating was just very clear of how his practice was anchored. And the Dalai Lama was very clear about the Buddhist mind and how you dealt with awareness and non-judgmental status and an ability to use that to let go of, if you will, the demons or whatever may be going on. And I was so struck by that till I am constantly reminded, I was thinking about this, of a student of mine who was from South Africa and working on her doctorate, and she was an advisee of mine and was really struggling with anxiety because she was also, this was 1990, so apartheid was just changing, and she had come from South Africa. Her family had been very involved with the movement, and this also was a way for her protection, but a way for her to gain an education, to be prepared to go back. So she got into that panic anxiety, as doctoral students will do, regardless of culture and background, et cetera, et cetera. The health services at that time was very good. They found a therapist for her. The therapist did not quite understand the South African culture, but especially did not understand a young woman who had spent her boarding years in school with German Dominican nuns. Therefore, when the therapist suggested that what she could do with relaxation is, to do the elevator experience, just go into your mind and just take all those feelings and allow them to float down to your feet, and you step out into this beautiful garden, and you walk around it and then you bring all of those feelings back. Problem was, you had a South African woman with strong conservative Catholic training. The idea of doing that was to invoke the spirits, not in a positive way, but to invoke those spirits that represented demons in her culture, were totally anti-Catholic, et cetera, et cetera. So I did that, which I always do the dance of, and my social work colleagues will go, uh-oh, Carolyn's on the edge of of undoing another therapist. But I thought, for the sake of this child, a young woman, she wasn't a child, but this young woman, I have to do something to intervene in this. So I sat with her for a bit, because we were supposed to be dealing with what the outline of the dissertation was. And I said, well, what if you step out of the elevator and meet Jesus? And she came back to me the following week, totally relaxed, and said, that's where I've been having the conversation, and I know I'm in the right place and I can do it. So when we see all of these techniques around us, we have to recognize what's the grounding. Where's the faith, the culture, the commitment there? And it's one of my messages to the Elms is to offer the opportunities for the various spiritual practices, but to look at the grounding and the tradition. John Kabat-Zinn, who's done a lot with mindfulness along the way, he kept very quiet about it when he was, in terms of the roots of mindfulness, when he was working at the medical center. He eventually began to talk about the Buddhist roots of the practice. People needed to be aware of how that fit with whatever religious traditions or practices they held. So it's important for us, as we offer students ways of managing stress, deepening a spiritual life, to be very clear and provide that information about this is where this comes from. This is where it has an impact. And this is where you may feel in tension with it. So Catholic spirituality is the belief that we are created in the image of God. Fundamental to Catholic spirituality is a gospel witness, the spirit of community, Eucharist, prayer, faith, works, hope, and love. They are building blocks leading us to Christ. And through prayer, we appeal to and have conversations with God. And then with dialogues. One of the things that I find in the conversations is trying to understand where are we with dialogue, particularly in the society today. The characteristics of a good dialogue involve trusting, speaking and listening, giving and receiving, mutual growth and enrichment, and being non-judgmental in the interactions. Pope Francis provides 3 fundamental guidelines to help dialogue. The duty to respect one's own identity and that of others, because true dialogue cannot be built on ambiguity or a willingness to sacrifice some good for the sake of pleasing others. The courage to accept differences, welcoming others as fellow travelers, and the genuine conviction that the good of each resides in the good of all. Sincerity of intentions, because dialogue as an authentic expression of our humanity is not a strategy for achieving specific goals, but rather a path to truth in order to transform competition into cooperation. One of the things that I always find, and I often would say this to people, I guess I still say it now, is that the God that I have a relationship with always has a sense of humor with me. So I find myself in circumstances thinking, I'm not going to be here, I'm not going to do this, and the next thing I know, God has put the circumstances in place where I have no choice. So in 1988, when I was at Smith, the students had challenged the Board of Trustees about apartheid and demanding that the board divest from stocks in companies that were held that were using those resources in South Africa. I had managed to have a conference to leave town. I left town, went to my conference. In the meantime, I had been sitting in on a number of meetings because I was just always sort of pulled into meetings. I got back in town and was informed. It was the weekend of the trustees meeting. They had begun to meet with a group of students, a group of faculty, and the staff around the issue of divestment. So I arrived back in town and was informed by the president at the time, we need you to facilitate a meeting of faculty, staff, and trustees on how we're going to deal with this issue of divestment, mainly because we need to get the students out of College Hall and back into the classroom, and we need to get on with our meetings. And I thought, now how did I wind up with this one? Well, I was the one person that knew the characters and what was going on who had been out of town, so I hadn't been in the throes of the anger and the inability to talk to one another, yet people knew I knew what was going on. So they said, we need to get this done in an hour, Carolyn, and it has to be over lunch because we've got to present to the entire Smith community by 1 o'clock. And I thought, an hour over lunch, right, just what you need. Violates all negotiating senses. You don't do it over food. You give people a little bit more breathing space. So I thought, okay. The room that we were meeting in Seeley Hall, you could look out and see St. Mary's Church. And I thought, okay, I need to pray that this room gets blessed quickly because I can't do this. You know, this is the ultimate sacrifice of, okay, we've got an African-American woman, let her deal with students and her colleagues and trustees as she knew them. So I went in, after really, seriously praying over it. If I'd had some holy water, I would have blessed the room. But I trusted Mary to be able to come across from St. Mary's and help me with this. And what came to me was, first have each one go around and identify in 1 to 3 words, because I didn't need the wordiness of faculty or trustees or students. And I had 21 people in the room. I said, in 1 to 3 words, what do you love about Smith? I took people aback, but they spoke from their heart. And I said, now, when we begin to engage in the next step and having this dialogue, remember what the person had said that they loved about the college. Okay? Powerful shift of energy. But that's what real dialogue gets to be about. So the agenda that some had about how we were going to resolve all this and present at 1 o'clock got pushed aside as they looked at how they needed to work together. We walked out of there without the animosity, yet the ability to speak the truth that each one had. And so the college divested at the board meeting in 1988 and went on about making sure that the issues that were important to each constituent were taken care of. You know, and those, my colleagues in the audience who are trustees, you know, fiduciary responsibility. How are we going to make sure that if we take this money out of these stocks and this company, we're not losing what we're going to wind up allocating for tuition later? Faculty and they also were concerned about ethics. Faculty and students, ethical issues and justice issues. And they too needed to hear, how do we do this? How do we secure the reputation and the foundation of the college, yet do what is right? And so it came to that conclusion, and we're able to do it. I think moving toward that common direction to remember what is important that each of us values about Elms, about those institutions that we make a deep commitment to, allows us to not be so rigid and to allow consciously, unconsciously, the Spirit to move among us in a very different way. And so as I think I got where you might be able to see it anyway, the sense of Pope Francis's 3 fundamental guidelines to help dialogue, the duty to respect one's own identity and that of others. The respect of our own identity is critical. We got to know who we are. I have to know who I am. You know, I knew I was an African American practicing Roman Catholic. That was not the African American they could deal with on the faculty and the trustee meetings. Practicing Roman Catholic, there was just too much baggage and suspicion with that. So I had to just deal with praying quietly and knowing the power of the Spirit in that situation. As we look at who others are, part of that communication and what I knew is that I was dealing with others who had strong negative feelings coming from all sorts of interactions along the way. True dialogue cannot be built on ambiguity or a willingness to sacrifice some good for the sake of pleasing others. So in that situation and others, we have to decide what is most important. It is discerning a decision about what will I lend my voice and support to. And in that situation, it was important to mediate. Not to run away, but to say, I'm going to try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. The courage to accept differences, welcoming others as fellow travelers, and the genuine conviction that the good of each resides in the good of all. The sincerity of intentions, because dialogue, as an authentic expression of our humanity, is not a strategy for achieving specific goals, but rather a path to truth in order to transform competition into cooperation. So the most fun I had looking at this as an issue was the issue of generational differences in worldviews that are shaped by major events, technology, and cultural change. I think it's interesting. Plinty wrote a book called Generations, which I found very interesting, and the title is Generations: The Real Difference Between Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, and Silence, and what they mean for Americans' future. I strongly invite people to look at it, because one of the things it does is gets me out of that saying, well, you know, it's a generation and they're only interested in their cell phones. And I can't do anything about that. Understanding how they got there is what's critical for us. So generational differences in worldviews are shaped by major events, technology, and cultural change. The events such as the Great Depression often resulted in people being frugal for the rest of their lives. However, focuses on events alone misses the rest of cultural change. And that's really important. Those of you who have a sense of what the generation of your parents are like and how they look at the world. I grew up, my parents were in their 40s when I was born, and I was born in 1946. So I have characteristics that are more like that generation 2 generations ago than I do of my peers with that. So it's just been interesting for me to look at how I navigate the world as a result of that. Focusing on events alone misses the rest of culture changes. So you can't just look at the wars, which you can go through, or other cultural changes, or technology as a change. And I think that's what's fascinating in terms of life 20 years ago, 50 years ago, or 100 years ago. Households tasks like laundry, food production, and preparation took so much more time and effort that much of the population could do little else. As recently as 1990, publicly sharing an opinion on politics meant physically attending a protest or writing a letter to the editor and hoping it got printed. Now it involves a few keystrokes. On a smartphone, creating a post on social media that nobody cares if you fact check it well. You know, you're not going to have somebody report you to the fact, well, you will, to the fact check person, but the implications are, it's out there, you know, and that's where we are with it. The root cause of cultural change, as she sees it, and the root cause of generational differences is technology, which keeps progressing year after year and having a deep impact on day-to-day life. It's completely changed the way we live, think, behave, and relate to each other. Unlike the ebb and flow of wars, pandemics, and economic cycles, technological change is linear. The mode may change from television to streaming videos, but it keeps moving. Technology keeps moving on roughly the same direction. Easier, faster, more convenient, more entertaining. Technology has profound effects on culture, behavior, and attitudes which break the old cycles of generations to form something novel. It's not just tablets or phones. If we think about technology, you go all the way back to the first humans. To make fire, to make wheels, to plant crops or use written symbols. They were using technology, which is defined as science or knowledge, put into practical use to solve problems or invent useful tools. Today, technology includes everything that makes our modern life possible, from medical care to washing machines to airplanes to modes of communication. Our lives are thus radically, strikingly different from the lives of those in decades past due to the technology we rely on. And the reality with the technology is we have the pandemics, one of the things, we have airplanes, we had HIV moving quickly around the world, we had COVID moving quickly around the world before we could catch up with it in terms of the medical scientific development for vaccines and others. We have information moving at that rate around the world. I oftentimes will take, because I do think fasting, it's not about just food. Sometimes fasting from the media is a good spiritual practice. So I encourage sometimes to take the day off and not read the New York Times online, which is great temptation. What we begin to see with the modes of communication and the interaction being so radically different from past generations, or looking at it in terms of where we are, is the possibilities of individualism and a slower life trajectory were occurred. Because as the modes of production, the chores of the house, work became less onerous on a wide swath of people, you then had people more concerned about how will my child move forward using an opportunity structure to not have to stay in the same cycle of poverty or lower income class that I am. So there was this sense then of delaying adulthood, if you will, for children to get them better educated and more opportunities. Concomitant with that, you began to see the changes around gender and also around race. The sense of looking for ways to open up and to have opportunities so that one should no longer sacrifice for the family or the greater good. So as cultures grew more individualistic, they placed more emphasis on individual choice and less on everyone being the same. Individualism promotes equal treatment on the basis of race, gender, ethnicity, and transgender status. It says you are who you are, and you should be treated equally. Equality is one of the unifying themes of cultural change over the last century, making it one of the unifying themes in generational change. So culture results from the interactions of actions and inheritance. Actions are the present choices made about what activities, what to do, how to behave. Inheritance is the operative context for actions that resulted from previous choices made. Many variables influence actions as we consider resources and people. So when I look at individualism and generational shifts, moral duties, pain, and suffering are not seen as they traditionally often were, as an inevitable part of life to be endured, or perhaps through which one should grow in personal character and spiritual depth. Rather, these are largely avoidable displeasures to be escaped in order to realize a pleasurable life of happiness and positive self-esteem. So the focus becomes on how do I enjoy, succeed, be well taken care of, etc., etc. I think it's a fascinating kind of look, and you can do that in your own family. Some of you, as you look at generational issues, it's like I can remember in my family that everybody came to the dinner table at the same time. Everybody had a conversation when asked. Children would ask, "What did you learn in school today?" That was the last test of the day. Okay? And in my family, it was, "What do you mean you don't remember?" You know, so that could be a whole conversation before you got to dessert, because there was that sense of you have an opportunity for which we've sacrificed. Therefore, you have an obligation and responsibility as a family. As that began to drift away, it was, well, I had fun, it was pleasurable, I got a date for the prom, da-da-da-da-da. It wasn't the same if you had that conversation even. So looking at what is the relationship that has changed over time. As what I found most fascinating about Jean Twiggin's research is that changes in technology and major historical events that shaped each generation. Her database includes national surveys, some going back nearly a century, as she explores the key shifts in attitudes and lifestyle choices that define each generation. So, as a boomer born in 1946 of older parents, the values and experiences of African Americans affected by the Black migration from the South to North and West greatly influenced my worldview. My parents left the world of segregation and racial oppression in the South, in Mississippi, for the freedoms and opportunities they saw in California. There were jobs opening up, federal jobs opening up, an opportunity structure that was there. My college days were greatly shaped by the protest of the Vietnam War, civil rights movement, and the activities or protest on campus. While the family could approve of some demonstrations, anything that looked like my college career was going to be interrupted was strongly discouraged. I lived in a house, which is why I'm always amused with smartphones, iPhones, etc., where there was one telephone in the very public space of the house. So everybody in the living room knew what you were saying on the phone. And if there was too long of a pause, someone came by and would ask you, what's going on? All right? So the issue for me growing up in that time was, yes, you can engage in all the demonstrations and protests, but that better not threaten your college career. And the way that one of my uncles would handle that is he said, we got into an argument about what he should be doing politically, which I absolutely love having that conversation with him. He said to me, until you have to go to the cotton fields, you have nothing to say in this house. And I went back to wash the dishes because I was the dishwasher. We didn't have a dishwasher in those days. Years later, I was so struck by that because it told me a lot of the family history that he had never said. The idea was to protect my generation so we would only see opportunity and not be hampered by the traumas and the history of the past. Now, that protection, of course, got me into social work because I kept trying to figure out what in the blazes was going on in the family. I needed to have some understanding of that the family secrets held. I suspect and have had conversation with people whose families have immigrated, and to hear them talk about the issues in Ireland or Italy or other places, and to realize that family secrets were kept to protect the child, the next generation. So we really have to recognize that for our students who are first generation, they often carry family secrets and have no understanding of what that does to them. So if we wind up then talking about spirituality with them without the cultural context of their families of origin and that history, we are separating them even more from their family. I had the advantage, at least when I was in college, of having a really good spiritual director along the way. So I always had somebody I could yell at about, why is the world doing this? Where is God in this? We could go down. We did that battle for 4 years as I tried other ways of making meaning out of life. And I just realized that, we're going to deal with suffering, and running away trying to have total happiness is not living. So we have to enable, and part of development is to enable students to be able to manage the great benefits of an education and the great losses of family and connection, but to understand what you are giving along the way. One of the things that they talk about is that as we look at challenges and changes in roles, and the fact that Gen Xers put their own trust in individualism by valuing self-confidence and harboring distrust. So there's this distrust of an older generation. There's also the accusation, which I've gotten from extended family, younger Why didn't you do something about this? You went off, got your doctorate, your dean. Why is this world still messed up like this? What happened to your generation that yelled and marched and did all of that? What have you done that's different? Those are the challenges ahead of that distrust. And how do you sit with the generation other than sharing your own story and being fully present to them as they walk that journey along the way? I was aware recently, you may have seen it. If not, I suggest that you take a look at it. In early 2023, there's a report of the U.S. Surgeon General out about the issue of loneliness and isolation being a major public health issue, and the sense of a lack of social connection and community were well documented. This just didn't come up with COVID. This has been a long ways happening, the disconnection and the isolation in the society. We're seeing and have seen that leaving the social context behind to favor the individual brings forth both freedom and chaos, both liberation and disconnection, relativism, the sense that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, society, or historical context are not absolute. The belief that there's no absolute truth, only truths that a particular individual or culture happen to believe, leaves us with the implications that different people can have different views about what's moral and immoral. So when I wound up teaching research at Smith, it was always extraordinary because I'd have to fight the battle of what are the assumptions under which data were collected. Who do the data privilege or not privilege? And as only could begin to happen in those days in the 80s is, well, I really don't like that instructor. I don't like the fact that he was a male researcher talking about women's issues. I don't like the fact that she was white talking about issues related to people of color. There's just too much bias in this, therefore I can't accept any of it. The only truth there is what I know. And those are hard classes to teach. Because the issue of, am I going to grade you on who you think you know, or whatever. Or worse than that, in those days, was I going to have to deal with the dean about what I said about who you thought you were. Yeah, those were difficult. I don't miss that. I am so aware of, I think my other story, how am I doing? Okay. My other story about really trying to navigate this personally as I became dean was, and a few of you know this, the Smith School for Social Work was notorious for summer upheavals. The students were on campus during the summer, and it was always something. I concluded 10 weeks of intensive time, so it was either the third week or the seventh week, something would blow up, either in the dorms or the students, or the heat, the humidity would be impossible, or some poor new faculty member would say something that they really didn't know they should not have said. Anyway, we had a rule at the time that when I became dean, it had been in place for a long time, that before you could march across the stage for graduation, you had to complete the master's thesis as well as all of your work. Now, you're nodding like that's perfectly reasonable. Well, what happened was students began to go, but you brought us in as a class, you told us to support each other, And now you're not letting us graduate together. I said, you come in as an individual, you're going out to do this work. The importance of your work is about the clients. So there was this great demonstration and crying outside of the school building. And I came back from lunch going, what's going on now? And all of my staff, everybody was looking out the window. I thought, okay, this is not good. So when I asked what was going on, and they told me, and my associate dean at the time, who had been looking out the window, said, do you want me to go out with you? I said, no. I thought, that's the last thing you do. You go out. I'm enforcing what the faculty has decided were the criteria for graduation. So I went out, and I sat down on the grass with them as they were singing and crying and all, and I just sat there silently. And eventually, they turned to me and said, well, Dean Jacobs, we need to go to class. I said, that's fine. I just wanted you to know that I understand your pain, but we have rules and regulations. We agreed to our accreditation, et cetera, et cetera. So when I went back in, my associate dean, who is very thoughtful and very good, said, you sat on the grass in white linen slacks. I said, I make enough money to buy another pair of slacks. I can't have students upset at this close, because Lily Hall, the office that I was in, was not that far from the president's office. So the last thing as a dean I wanted to have was the president and the senior staff showing up, going, what is going on? Now, one of the things that I learned from that is from my days as a student at Sacramento State in the mix of the 60s, where we took over the president's office around issues of funding for African American students. And one of the things that I learned is that once an office has been taken over, administrators then have an experience and a game plan to deal with you. Therefore, you can only do that once, okay? So what I discovered at Smith is, because we were now into the 90s, is that the entire IT system et al. Had made sure that every function in College Hall, financial aid, student support, president's office, dean's offices, all of the computer systems linked to other places. So you didn't bring the college down like you did in the 60s, because people had learned. They may take over, we've got to work, you move the functions out. The technology allowed that to happen. It was not like that before. So the power of how you were going to navigate in different issues, and what I knew is that the issue of being present and dialogue was critical. Not saying that I can take my computer home and work. I can run the school from any place on the campus other than my office. It isn't necessary. But respecting the integrity of what students need. Now, I think it's fascinating these days in terms of students engaging in dialogue, and they're going to protest and take over because it makes great PR, but the real issue of it being primarily an image in most universities and colleges, it's just an image. It doesn't do the impact of closing it down, which was the intent in those days. So what role might Elms play? And I think it becomes interesting to me that as we think about spirituality, not just from a Catholic perspective, but in the secular age, the critical part is understanding what's the foundation What's the theological underpinning? Where do people feel a presence of God or not God in the kind of practices that you may find on campuses and around? So that ongoing awareness of what is within the tradition of the Sisters of St. Joseph and the grounding and the belief in the school, and how do we make sure that as we provide people ways of learning about spirituality, that we also are grounded in who we are as a campus. That noting the core values of faith, community, justice, and excellence, grounded in the gospel message, because that's who we are, and Catholic social teachings, an awareness of family and personal histories, of understanding that, yes, the sexual abuse scandal is out there, students may have been affected, families may have been affected. How do we provide that space for that healing as well? In the context of generational and cultural context, how are we aware of the cultural differences, the religious practices and traditions of our students and all? And our faculty and staff. I don't just limit this to students. Continuing the work of Parker Palmer and the circles of trust that faculty, I think, and staff have engaged in. That's so critical because it's from there that you can have the dialogues when you need to. And I just strongly encourage that and the work of campus ministry and the center, St. Augustine Center, the review of the liberal arts curriculum, which I know you're engaged in, asking the question, where is the Catholic identity? And I'm not talking about doing a course on Catholic identity, please. That's a nice way to tuck it off and say we fit that criteria. But what does it mean in faculty development and the kind of extracurricular experiences you offer students and faculty to intentionally be committed to dialogue with the surrounding community? How does Elms interact with Chicopee? At a whole nother level in terms of, as a Catholic college, what do we offer this community where we live? How do we pay attention to the social media shifts and influence and the uniqueness of Elms' demographic now and anticipating the future? The commitment to be faithful to Catholic spiritual practices and action in our world is at the heart of Elms for me. The intellectual capacity that you have, and I think that's extraordinary as well in terms of who we are as a college. But if we believe that all are made in the image and likeness of God and enjoy a natural dignity and should be able to pursue fundamental values, then the individual and the group, the individual and the college, have a responsibility to promote the welfare of all peoples. Spiritual formation in this area is essential for discerning responses to the ethical questions that are of our time. And so in closing, I was reflecting on what I'd heard as well on the issues from students around the sense of belonging and what did that mean. So, on belonging for the dear neighbor, I found a statement from the Shalom Institute's vision, or a quote from that statement. And they say, and it so resonated with me that I felt very much it's a part of Elms. Belonging is the manifestation of God's union with all things. When we are radically inclusive, we embrace the loving essence of each individual. A sense of belonging for each of us means we are part of something larger than ourselves, while honoring who we are and who we want to be. So, thank you for your time.
Okay, so we now have an opportunity to engage directly with our distinguished speaker. If you raise your hand, I'm happy to come over to you with a roving microphone. Feel free also to orate loudly the question as I figure out how to turn this on.
Not the microphone for you.
Oh,
The other one.
so is this what he wants?
That's the one for the house. The one with the blue tape on it.
Yeah, the one right there.
The one right here.
And parts, this one is now on for you.
Oh, okay. Well, you won't see me. I've done that before. And used to have, in some places, we have little stools. Step stools for some of the kids.
Questions for Dr. Jacobs?
Thank you, I really enjoyed it. In some ways when we communicate our identity, if Elms just says, I'm going to throw this out so you think, Elms just says it's Catholic, generationally, I find some students are sort of confused by this. I think students really need to know what it's not going to be like, and they'll describe something, and what they're describing is not mistaken. It's another branch of Catholicism. There's a branch that's very competent. They don't mind someone asking a lot of hard questions. They're welcoming to neighbors that are very different. I'll go ahead and name a school that's not like that. We'll just see how it goes. Emerita in Florida would treat a lot of our students very poorly. Would shame them, would tell them, we love you, but you're like an alcoholic because of who you fall in love with, things like that, right? I mean, I said to them when I was on the job market, Emerita, right, sent my app right back. You know, they require confessions of faith that are very specific. So, I think we do, I think students eventually see we're not like that. I'm also not Catholic, so it's hard for me to just get up and say, oh no, I'm not that kind of Catholic, I'm some other kind, right? But I'll say Elms isn't like, I'll try to, I don't know how to quickly assure people who are worried. And yeah, I'd like to get there more quickly when someone tells me they are. So I'm interested in what to say.
Thank you. I spend a lot of time with people who want to know, how can you be Catholic today? And particularly at Smith, there was a lot of discussion around my being Catholic and being on the faculty, let alone being dean. And what I look to is to say, I'm going to look at the message of Jesus. I'm going to look at Beatitudes. What he taught is what I believe. I also believe in Eucharist and that sense of presence of God and Jesus in that transformational experience. Now that becomes a very personal one about how I practice. So I do my own confession with that. I think for non-Catholics at a Catholic college such as Elms, that sense of the gospel message is what resonates. That sense of we want to be concerned about the poor. We want to be concerned about how we are the dear neighbor to others. We want to be concerned about community and how we support one another. And to be open to the range of diversity and equality among us. So, yes, I believe You don't have to join me in the belief. But you need to, if you're coming here, respect the rights of all of us to believe. And I think that's, I think that's fair game in terms of the academic community and the intellect with that. I think what's important for those of us who are Catholic at Elms is that we don't get into watering down who we are. So it doesn't mean that I go, oh, I'm going to Mass or I'm going to, you have to go with me. It's, it's important to me that I do this, and let's continue that meeting or conversation later. So how do you value the differences in the other? And how do you leave it open for a dialogue along the way? Does that help at all?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something, again, it's not my fight, I'm not, but I get sad when I hear a school like Emerita, when Catholics say, that school's really Catholic. Right? As if they're doing more of this, and that's why they're being, I'm not trying to divide the room here, but I think Emerita treats people very badly. Okay, so to be very clear on that, they treat people in my family who would try to go would be expelled. Right? Family members of mine work there. So my, but that's called really Catholic, whereas the school that, again, that's what you're talking about, right? More rooted in the actual behavior and treatment of people that sounds more Christian. For some reason, I just can't say it. I wouldn't want to concede anything to any other group, right? That's an Elms faculty thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you're into the dilemma of the world in which we're into, the lack of a capacity to have good conversations, and we just stonewall on things and say, has to be this, has to be that, and it's not. So I remember years ago when I was arguing with my spiritual director, I was an undergraduate, whatever, and Peg finally said to me, look, Carolyn, that is not my God. I don't know where you got that image from, nor is that my church. So they're different experiences. And that to me was most freeing, because it's like the old adage in doing research. Sometimes there's more diversity within a group than there is between groups. And it's taking it from that perspective. Or where did you get your theology? Which is what Peg went off to get into me. Where did you get that? So that whole sense of delving into that, I think it's a good circle of trust conversation. Great one for Father Mark, because he gave just an extraordinary homily in the opening convocation that just, I thought, oh, this is so good. But it is having conversations with people who are walking this journey. It doesn't mean that you have to convert or anybody has to convert. The issue is of respect and understanding the richness of the tradition. I mean, that's what's just extraordinary. The richness of the tradition. And if nothing else, looking at the fact of the lives that have been given to support Elms in terms of the work of the sisters and alumni and faculty. And along the way, there's something very special here. So hang into the conversation, and the right students will come here, and the right faculty, and those who lead it out of the real will go there.
Carolyn, thank you for this really wonderful talk, lecture, conversation. One of the things that you said towards the end, I think, really relates to the mission statement of Elms College and can in a sense, summarize our Catholic mission and the work that we do, which is, to paraphrase what you said, that we believe, if we believe that everyone is created in the image of God, we have an obligation to work for the betterment of all mankind. Right. And you know, you see in our mission statement that our students will prepare students to effect positive change in the world. You can see the connection with our Catholic mission, that work of our students. So that was a comment. The question, and you know, in dialogue, and I love that paragraph right now. You know, when the quote is dialogue as a means to get to the truth. And you know, it's so difficult in our world, and we're seeing campuses, and that's a very, very current topic, where it's so difficult to engage in true conversations around a whole host of topics. And the role of campus and universities is to get to the truth, right? That's one of the knowledge and truth is one of the things. So, not an easy question, not one easy answer, but I'd like to hear a little bit of your wisdom on that thing about dialogue and our role as spaces and fora where dialogue needs to happen in search of truth.
Yeah. One of the things, this is what gets me into my great belief. It's called daily prayer in whatever form it takes for you. Whether it is the daily attendance at Mass, whether it's morning meditation, however the list of things are there. Because it transforms my ability and others to be able to listen to others. My other story that I often tell, which is really it's funny to me, but it may be funny to you at some point, but anyway. So I had this faculty member who always spent his time coming to my office telling me not only what I should do, but what I should make other faculty do. And I thought, making other faculty do things. Fascinating. Yes, I have power as dean, but yeah. So my assistant would always sort of plug him in at a time where he could be constrained a bit, you know, and warn me clearly beforehand so he didn't come bouncing in the office, so she blocked that. And I had a particularly challenging time with some faculty around an issue, i.e. workload. And so he came into I was praying about him. One, I never left school, never left home without praying. And I still don't leave home without praying. So I thought, Lord, I don't know what to do with him. Because I just want to throw him out of my office and I can't do that. You have to look at the consequences of some things, you know. It would have been great to do that, but I would have paid for it. So he came into my office and went on and on about who wasn't doing their work on the faculty. He could tell me everybody who wasn't carrying their workload. So he went through that. Why aren't you going to do something about it? I said, well, you know, I met with faculty. They know what the work is. Okay. But you're the dean. You should do something about it. I said, you know, I can't do what people don't want to do. You know, I work at it or whatever. So he went into this rant about how I wasn't doing my job at all. I said, listen, you know, I have a job as dean. That's not going to change. Now, if you want to be dean, I wind up with a lot of requests to my desk to nominate people to be dean. And he looked at me and said, I don't want to be dean. I said, so what is it that's going on with you about this? And then he looked at me and he said, you're asking me for when I grow up, what I want to be? And I said, you know, that's a thought. So part And that's part of what meditation practice does for me, is to allow me to take that energy and to see how is God using that as a possibility. And rather than coming back in anger, restrictions with, hurry up and get out of my office, I thought, what's the underlying issue here? What is it that you want? Now, I knew culturally there was big difficulties. I don't think I wrote about this in specific because I thought, you can't say too many things in writing. But one of the things that I knew is that he was a person who family came over on the Mayflower, graduate of Amherst College. Here he was at Smith College that he also got doctoral studies in, or did his master's in. And I thought, here's this guy struggling with no longer having the white privilege because he's meeting with an African-American dean who has the power, mainly to move offices around. When we renovated the building. Oh yeah, no, that's real power. When you renovate a building and then people start angling for offices. But I thought, let me develop the reflection of who I am and then how I am perceived. And then how do I do this in compassion? Because he was in pain about not being where he thought he should be, or at least another white man should be there. He got tired of women. He had 2 women deans before me, so he's tired of women, and then didn't particularly think he was going to love having an African American as dean over time. One of the things that I found about him years later, he nominated me for an award. So the issue of how all of a sudden that turns around in very difficult times is about how do I deal with who I am in relationship to my God, and in relationship to myself, and in relationship to others. So how do I do right relationship all the way around? And I didn't think when I walked in there I was going to do that. But he just opened it up, and we could have a conversation about his own sense of himself and his career. So, does that help a little bit? My response to, yeah. Others.
My name is Diane, and thank you very much for your talk. And this is a story. I have nothing to add to the academia because I think you've covered it all. But I've been a nurse practitioner for 55 years. And for those many years, I grappled with spirituality and how to treat the patient and when to use spirituality in my practice of taking care of patients. The last 2 years, I was involved in caring for the COVID patients in Florida. As a matter of fact, I cared for the first COVID patient that was diagnosed in Florida. We worked very hard, and I saw some very fearful, frightened, dying patients. But I'd like to relate one story to you about my spirituality and how I was able to show it to this particular patient. I went into this room. Of course, we were covered in plastic and hats and caps and all kinds of masks. And I went into this room, and this gentleman must have been in his 60s, 65. He was a little overweight. He was actually pretty much a classic. He was a smoker. And they always had the question and looked at me, am I going to die? Well, I did know after a while who was going to die by their oxygen saturation, what kind of oxygen apparatus we needed for them, what their background was. And you must always remember they was totally isolated from their families. Their families were us. Even dietary wouldn't go in. Nobody would go in but the nurses. And he was on a very high concentration of oxygen. And I knew he was going to die, but I would of course not tell him that because there was always a miracle that could be involved. When I'm at the end of what medicine could do, I could only rely on what was in my heart. And at my older age, because this was only 2 years ago, that I could rely on what Jesus would help me to do. And I would always ask Jesus what to do in this situation. And as the night was going on, he was getting worse and more worse. I was in the progressive care unit. The next step was going to be the ICU. And I put on the non-rebreather, and his respirations were very high. His color was pale. And he said, "What's going to happen to me?" And I said, "Well, you're getting a little bit worse. And what I can do for you now is pray with you." So I asked him to hold out his hands. And he said to me, "I'm an atheist." I said, "Okay, I'm not. I have a strong belief in God. Why don't we just hold hands and just think about something good?" I'm sorry, my mouth is dry. I'm nervous. And I don't know what he said in his heart, but I know what I said in my heart. The next day he died. And that was a story that came about many times in caring for COVID patients. And I'm sure he dwelt upon that on his last times that we had prayed. And so I thank Jesus for that. And I thank all of you for allowing me to speak and to tell my story.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have time just for one last question.
Hi, Carol. How are you? Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I want to go back to the story you just told about the gentleman who had nominated you. And I want to think about one of the slides that you showed about the practices and how they were deep-rooted in the Catholic faith. Did you find yourself in your careers drawing on or exercising one practices more than others, as well as even introducing it to your family or to your students?
Yes, in both counts. And depending on where I was in my own career and life, I used to be able to get to daily Mass. And so that I did early on in my career. And then I had too many administrative responsibilities, so it didn't fit, unless the schedule sort of worked for me across the street at St. Mary's, which had a noon Mass at the time. What I did, which is the advantage of being dean, is I had decided that, I was chairing research at the time. I had decided that I wanted to teach a course on clinical practice and on contemplative practice and clinical practice. So I designed that course as an elective and was able to teach it. Now, the reason I was able to teach it is because I taught research, which if you work in a social work school, maybe not the Elms, it's the one course that most faculty don't want to teach. But I'm sure that's not the issue here. So, when you're teaching the courses that people don't want to teach, when you want to do an elective, they let you. And so I was able to design a post-master's course on contemplative practice and clinical practice. The thing that I found out, starting with that, and what I did a master's course on social work and spirituality. And the first thing I found out with that one was the number of students. Everybody wanted to take the course. Nobody wanted to pray, practice in any way. It was like, okay, I want to know what to do if those people have a problem. And I said, well, first of all, you got to deal with your problem. Because if you can't practice in your own contemplative style, whatever it is, you have no business dealing with others around that, because you're moving into an area of faith, trust in the Holy Spirit, and that, unless you have dealt with that in your own spiritual formation and development, you just can't do it. So it was just a fascinating course to teach, and I had students who were Jewish Orthodox, Catholic, recovering Catholics, Protestants of all ilk, Jehovah's Witnesses. It was quite a group of students. Now, the first step in all of that was to say, we're going to just sit in silence for 3 to 5 minutes before class starts. And no laptops, no cell phones. If you can't sit in silence, you've got a problem as a clinical social worker in training anyway, because you can't listen. So we got into that as a way of moving into the content and as a way of helping them work with clients. And it was an extraordinary time, because I hadn't realized, although I should have, because I've done continually at work with social work advisors, field advisors, and other faculty, is how angry people in the helping professions can be about God and the unresolved issues that they carried with them, and how they sought to use the theory and practice of social work as a way to circumvent God and help with somebody's healing. So part of what was beginning to happen, at least early in the 80s, with a lot of our field advisors and all, is a real struggle with the 12-step movement. They couldn't see how that could be healing, because people would go and move through steps and come back with insights that the social worker hadn't helped them with. And so they got resentful of the 12-step movement. So I had to spend some time working with people in and around that. What I would say is there's an honest hunger that was there, unspoken, for fear of seeing that as weakness, because in classical analytic theory ages ago, that was seen as a weakness, the belief in God, the desire for a relationship with God. And so I had to stand up once again and say, the Spirit of God moves in all sorts of ways to heal people. We are not the sum or the end. If we're really good, we can cooperate with that spirit of healing. So, yeah. It was hard, it was fun. And as Dean, I was able to do some things creatively with the Contemplative certificate program, and to hire a couple of faculty members who had a good spiritual bent, Protestant. And, it didn't matter, as long as you got some grounding and who you are and how you practice and how you live. So, it's good. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Jacobs, for your brilliant and very moving lecture. As the executive director, I'm not supposed to have favorite distinguished lectures. This one takes the cake for sure. Thank you to everyone who came out tonight for this lecture. On behalf of the St. Augustine Center for Ethics, Religion, and Culture, please join me in thanking Dr. Jacobs again for her exceptional insight on Catholic spirituality in dialogue with secular culture. Dr. Jacobs, we're all in your debt, and we look forward to inviting you back to share your wisdom with us publicly at some point in the future. Again, to everyone in the audience, Thank you for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful night and a very Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Thank you.